All right, today we're going to actually get into adding integers together, whether they're double positives, like two positive integers together, double negatives, as in two negative integers being added together, or if it's some combination of the two, a positive and a negative, or a negative and a positive. We need to remember some rules, and I'm going to run through those real quick for you and also show you what you're going to do. So remember the rules yesterday. We saw some examples of like when we have two negative integers being added together. So we could have, I said yesterday, we could have playing cards that could represent integers, and that's why I asked you to bring them in today. We could have like a 5 of hearts and a 4 of diamonds, both of which are red. Remember, red chips represented negatives, so red cards will also represent negatives. So I will represent my 5 negatives with 5 red chips, and my 4 negatives with 4 red chips, and we can go, oh, hey, there's 9 negatives there. That would be negative 9. Well, yeah, it would be negative 9. That would be our net result, negative 9. And we could write it in two different ways. We could write it as negative 5 plus negative 4, or we could write it as negative 4 plus negative 5, and in both cases, the answer is negative 9. Now, what I want you to get used to is writing those numbers down. Just representing those numbers as, oh, hey, here's a positive number, here's a positive number, or here's a negative number, here's a negative number, and just writing them down so that we can go ahead and represent them when we actually get to our assignment. So there's negatives. Just add the magnitudes, keep the sign, and that's the rule for adding negatives. When we're finding the sum of a negative number and some other negative number, we add the magnitudes. Remember, magnitude is just distance from 0. It's basically the number without the sign. So if it's negative 4, the magnitude would be 4. Or if it's negative 5, the magnitude is 5. Or if it's negative 12, the magnitude is 12. We don't worry about the sign, we just worry about the number. So we add those two magnitudes together, and we keep the negative sign if both of them are negative. The same thing applies when doing positives, except this time we'll look at two different numbers. Here's positive 3 and positive 7. There's my positive 3. There's positive 7. We can look at it and go, well, there's 10 positives. It's positive 10. Absolutely it is. The net result is a positive 10. And we could represent that as positive 3 plus positive 7 equals positive 10. Or we could say positive 7 plus positive 3 equals positive 10. And again, the rule is very similar to that of negatives. We add the magnitudes, again, it's just the number without the sign, and keep the positive sign if it's two positives being added together. So the overarching rule, like I said yesterday, is you add the magnitudes, so you don't worry about the sign, just add the magnitudes, and then look at the sign, keep the sign. So add the magnitudes first. Once that's done, then keep your sign. All right, now the only other situation we might have is when we have a positive and a negative being added together. So here I have negative 7 and positive 5. I'll represent negative 7 with my 7 red chips, and I'll represent positive 5 with 5 yellow chips. Now we would go through and say, hey, we have some 0 pairs here. We've got stuff like, well, here's a 0 pair, and here's a 0 pair, and here's a 0 pair. And we could go, oh yeah, there's a 0 pair, and yeah, there's another 0 pair. We've got some 0 pairs, so we could count those out. And when we do that, we would look at it and say, well, in looking at this, we could get rid of those 0 pairs and say, well, that's just 2 negatives left. And that results negative 2. And that would be negative 7 plus positive 5 equals negative 2, or positive 5 plus negative 7 equals negative 2. Regardless of how we write it, it is still true because of the commutative property of addition. So, the rule for adding two different integers, as in a positive and a negative, or a negative and a positive, is this. We look at the magnitudes again. Remember, the magnitude is just the number without the sign. We look at the magnitudes, but instead of adding them, we're going to subtract the magnitudes. So when the signs are different, we subtract the magnitudes, and then we look at the magnitude that is largest and use that sign. So in our last example, I'm going to go back to it very quickly. In our last example, we saw that we had a set where we had negative 7 and positive 5. Well, if we look at that set, we could look at it and go, hey, the magnitude of Negative 7 is 7. And the magnitude of positive 5 is 5. Well, we take the difference in those. What's 7 minus 5? That's 2. To determine the sign, we look and see which magnitude is greater, 7 or 5. Well, that's 7. Its magnitude is greater. So we would take 7 minus 5, subtract the magnitudes, that's 2, and then keep the sign of the larger magnitude number. Negative 7 was the larger magnitude number, so we keep that sign negative. That's why it's negative 2. All right, continuing on. Again, we see the rule for adding two separate integers. All right, now, we have that. I'm going to go ahead and show you what I want you to do. So you should have some playing cards, and I do have some that you can use, but I ask you to bring some if you could. And what you're going to do is you're going to use the playing cards in your deck, ace through 10. Aces will represent 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through 10 will represent whatever numbers on that card. We're going to use red cards to represent negatives, black cards to represent positives. So what I want you to do is this. With a partner, get together, and you're going to first pull out all your kings, queens, and jacks, put them off to the side, and then you're going to shuffle up your cards really well. And once they're shuffled up really well, you're going to draw 2 cards at random. They can be from the top, they could be from the middle. You could just kind of spread out the cards on the desk and pick out 2 of them. Whatever you want to do, you're going to pick out 2 cards and look at them. So up on my screen, I have a 2, which is black, and an 8, which is red. Remember, reds represent negatives and black represents positives. So I'm going to go ahead and write down the value for those cards. I'm going to go ahead and write, oh, that 2, it's positive because it's black. So positive 2. I'm going to put the positive symbol with it just for now. Once we get used to doing what we're doing, then we'll kind of get rid of it. But we have positive 2 plus, again, we're just adding integers. The 8 is red, it's negative, negative 8. So I have 2 different kinds of integers. I have a positive and a negative. So when we're adding different styles of integers, we look at the magnitude. There's magnitude, there's a magnitude. We subtract them. 8 minus 2. 8 minus 2 would be 6. So we should expect this number to be 6 as an answer. But it's either going to be a positive 6 or a negative 6, depending upon which magnitude is bigger. So let's look back at those magnitudes. 8 and 2. Which one is larger? Well, if we can see pretty clearly, that magnitude that's larger happens to be 8. So our sign will go with the sign of the number that had a magnitude of 8, which was negative 8. So our answer for positive 2 plus negative 8 is equal to, it'll be a negative 6. Now what I want you to do is then, once you have that, go ahead and flip over those cards, and you'll go ahead and draw again. So I'll go ahead and draw again here. Draw again. Oh, I got a 6 and a 6, and this time they're 2 different styles of 6s. I have a positive 6 and a negative 6. So the negative 6 is my red 6, there we go, plus my positive 6, which is the black 6. Hey, we have a negative 6 and a positive 6. Those are opposite integers. The net value of opposite integers is always 0. It's always 0. That's the 0 principle at work. We don't have to do any more work than that. Sometimes you get easy ones like that. But you notice, I wrote down the value for each of the cards as to what integer they would represent, and then I put down the value for the addition of them, whether it's positive or negative. In my case, it was neutral, 0. All right, let's try another one. This time, let's see, my 2 cards that popped up. Ooh, ace and ace. And they are both different colors. One is positive, one's negative. So I would represent this as positive 1, the black ace, and the negative 1 plus negative 1 because I have a red ace. Again, aces are 1, positive 1 and negative 1. Again, form a 0 pair, net worth of 0. Okay, that's kind of strange that that popped up, but that's okay. We'll do another one here. So I'll go ahead and do one more. Shuffle again. Oh, here we go. We have a positive 10 and a positive 3. So to write that down, I would say I've got positive 10 plus positive 3 equals, well, let's see. I've got two positives. That means I can add the magnitudes. Again, my magnitude, 10 and 3. 10 and 3 would be 13. The sign for it depends upon what sign they originally started with. Since they were both positive, my answer will be positive. Please remember, you don't have to include the positive sign in your answer or in the numbers that you're putting down, but for right now, I would like you to, simply because it gets you used to going, okay, here's the positive, here's the negative, here's a positive, here's a negative. So just to get into that habit. What I want you to do with your partner is this. Again, pull out the ace through 10, put the king, queen, and jack off to the side, and you're going to go ahead and shuffle up the normal numbers from ace through 10, and then you will draw out 2 at random. You will write down the values that they were, and actually, because, see, on my screen I get the picture of the cards, but because I don't know what the cards they were, could you just do me a favor and maybe like draw a picture of that card and say, oh, well, this was the 10 of spades, so we'll just say 10 of spades, I'll just use S, and 3 of spades. 3 of spades, or something like that. Just draw me a little rectangle with the value and which suit it was, just so I can check your work on that. Make it easy for yourself there. For each one of those, draw what the card was, and then put the value for them, positive or negative, and then find the overall net value. So you'll go ahead and draw the card, write down the values of them, add them together, and put down the net value for them. I want you to get at least 20. At least 20. That seems like a lot, but it really won't take that long. In fact, I did 4 in just a few minutes. You're going to do at least 20 with a partner. You can do it on the same page, so you can have a shared piece of paper. Just make sure that your paper has both of your names at the top and today's date. And then after you've done that, what I want you to do is turn that into the appropriate tray in the back for your class. And after that's done, once you have your 20, you can go ahead and do races against your partner, like flipping over 2 cards and seeing who can get it faster, and kind of like a game of war or speed, something along those lines. And then if you guys both get really good, you can go ahead and challenge another group and do kind of a double war where you're kind of going one group against the other. If you find that, you know, this stuff's pretty easy, we're not really having all that much trouble with it, then throw in an extra card. See if you can kind of identify the values of those, kind of like what we did in our bell work yesterday with 3 integers in an expression, kind of that same idea. So do that. If you have questions, please let the sub know. They can get a hold of me, and I hope that you guys have some great successes at this. We will see you Monday. Thanks a lot, guys.